Tonight, my child, let me take you back to a quiet village that existed long before alarms or glowing screens. The streets were narrow, warmed by soft lanterns, and the world moved at a slower breath. Close your eyes and picture the cobblestones shining under the moon. People here lived simple, steady lives, shaped by hands rather than machines, and every morning began in a way you might find strange today. This is where our story begins, in a place touched gently by time. Walk with me now, through the dim paths of this old village. Wooden doors creak softly, and warm air drifts out from homes preparing for the day. Even the wind carries familiar scent smoke from chimneys, worn leather, and dough waiting to become bread. Here, every sound had meaning, and every worker played a part. Before the sun rose, the village rested between dreaming and waking. These moments belonged to those who shaped the morning long before the rest of us opened our eyes. In those early hours, the village felt almost suspended in time. Shadows curled around corners, and only a few figures moved through the soft darkness. Most people slept under heavy blankets, unaware that others were already guiding the day forward. These workers carried small routines that held the entire village together. Tonight, I will tell you about the first of them, a man whose quiet steps decided when the morning truly began for everyone. Back then, my child, people had no buzzing alarms beside their beds, no devices to flicker them awake. Instead, they relied on a single man who walked the streets before sunrise. He didn't rush or shout. He simply knew who needed to wake, and when. They called him the knocker-upper, the human alarm clock. His job was simple in words, but essential in life. Without him, factories stalled, bakers arrived late, and the rhythm of the entire village fell apart. Imagine him stepping out into the cold dawn, wrapped in a worn coat, holding a long wooden pole polished by years of use. His boots tapped softly on the stones as he made his rounds through narrow lanes. No one else was awake yet, but he walked with purpose, knowing each window he must reach. The glow of a single lantern guided him. In the silence of early morning, he was the first heartbeat of the village. At each home, he raised his pole and tapped the upper window gently. Tap, tap, tap. Never too loud, never rushed. Some families woke at one tap, others needed 3 or 4. He remembered them all, as if each window carried a story only he knew. Sometimes he whispered a greeting to the sleepers inside, though they could not hear him. His careful knocking slipped into their dreams and pulled them softly toward the morning light. People depended on him more than you might imagine. Factory workers, train operators, bakers, and shopkeepers all trusted his perfect timing. If he arrived late, entire shifts could crumble, but he rarely failed. Even in heavy snow or fog thick as milk, he followed the same path each morning. The village respected him, not for power or wealth, but for reliability. He was the quiet engine that kept everything moving long before machines took over. He earned only a few coins a week, sometimes less. A loaf of bread, a cup of soup, or simply a grateful nod might be all he received. Yet he treated his work with dignity. To him, waking the village meant giving it life each day. He never hurried, never complained. Even when his hands shook from cold or age, he lifted that long pole with the same steady care. His purpose was simple, but his devotion made it meaningful. When I was young, I often woke before my parents and listened for him. Lying under warm blankets, I watched faint morning light dance across the ceiling. Then I heard it tap, 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 carried gently through the quiet. That sound comforted me. It meant the world outside was waking safely, exactly as it always had. I never saw his face clearly, but I knew his rhythm by heart. His tapping was the lullaby of morning in my childhood. So, my child, that was the knocker-upper, the human alarm clock, who woke the world one window at a time. His work seems small now, but without him, the village would have stumbled each morning. Let his gentle tapping stay with you as we move on. Breathe slowly, imagine the dawn spreading across the roofs, and feel the quiet pride of a man who carried mornings on his shoulders. Soon, I'll show you the next worker who shaped our days. Now, my child, let us walk a little farther down the misty lane. At this hour, when only a few windows glow faintly, another worker quietly begins his day. He is the milkman, a gentle figure carrying the morning's very first gift. Listen closely. You may hear the soft clinking of glass bottles in his wooden crate, each one filled with fresh milk gathered before dawn broke over the hills. The milkman starts long before the sun even considers rising. He dresses in a heavy coat, lifts his crate of bottles, and steps carefully into the chilled air. The road is dark, but he knows every stone by memory. Each house expects him, and every doorstep has its own little story. Some families need one bottle, others two, and he remembers them all without writing a thing down. What I remember most, my child, is the music of those bottles. When they touched, they made a soft, bright chime, like tiny bells in the morning quiet. That sound floated through the village, long before the birds began to sing. It was comforting, a promise that breakfast would soon be warm, and the day would unfold gently, just as it always had. Some families preferred thick milk with a cream layer on top. Others wanted skim milk for baking. The milkman understood these things the way a friend understands another friend's habits. He placed each bottle carefully, making sure the cat didn't tip it over, or the frost didn't crack the glass. His delivery wasn't just a job, it was a small kindness repeated every morning. Winter was the hardest season for him. The cold froze the air, and sometimes even the milk. He often tucked the bottles inside his coat to keep them from turning solid before reaching the doorstep. Snow piled high against fences, and wind pushed against his back, but still he walked on. The village depended on his arrival, and he would not disappoint them, not even on the coldest morning. At times, the milkman met early risers on the porch. They whispered greetings so as not to disturb sleeping children. Some handed him coins, wrapped in cloth. Others simply thanked him with warm smiles. He never lingered long. He knew that dozens of homes still waited for their morning milk, and his path stretched far across the still sleeping streets. When I was your age, I used to wait at the window just to catch a glimpse of him. The golden tops of the bottles reflected the lantern light like tiny suns. Once, on my birthday, he gave me a small sip of fresh milk, still warm from the farm. I swear, my child, it tasted like the very beginning of the day, soft, sweet, and full of hope. People today may not understand how vital he was. Without refrigerators, milk spoiled quickly. Without him, children went without breakfast, and mothers could not cook. He carried not just bottles, but the rhythm of the morning itself. His footsteps on the cobbles signaled that the village was waking, stretching, and preparing for another day of honest work. Sometimes he left little notes for families. Watch for frost, or more cream tomorrow. He remembered babies' birthdays, elderly neighbors' ailments, and which doorstep had a loose board. His route was more than a list of houses. It was a map of kindness, and with each quiet delivery, he stitched the village a little closer together. So, my child, that was the milkman, the gentle guide of our mornings. Long before crowds filled the streets or ovens warmed the kitchens, he walked alone with his bottles of light. As we leave him to finish his route, take a moment to imagine the sound of glass fading down the lane. At the next chapter of our walk, we will meet another worker who shaped the dawn in his own small way. Now, my child, let us turn toward the eastern road, where the sky begins to pale. Here rides the newspaper boy, a small figure with a large canvas bag slung over his shoulder. He pedals his bicycle with surprising energy for someone awake before sunrise. The wheels hum softly on the cobblestones, and each turn of the pedal carries the day's first news into the sleeping village. The boy woke long before most children his age. While others dreamed under warm blankets, he folded newspapers by lantern light, stacking them neatly into his bag. Then he slipped outside, careful not to wake his family. The air was cold, but he enjoyed the quiet. To him, the village felt like a secret world, that existed only before dawn. As he rode, he tossed each newspaper with a gentle flick of his wrist. Thump, thump. Soft landings on porches echoed through the still morning air. Some papers slid perfectly against doors. Others bounced off steps and startled cats. He laughed quietly to himself whenever that happened. His work was part precision, part adventure, and entirely his own responsibility. Several villagers relied on him dearly. Old Mr. Hollins waited by the window every morning, eager for headlines. The baker liked to read the paper while his dough rose, and the station master needed the timetable updates before trains began to run. The boy didn't know it, but his small deliveries connected the whole village to the larger world beyond the hills. The job wasn't always easy. Rain turned, streets slippery, and wind threatened to snatch papers from his hands. In winter, frozen fingers made folding difficult, and sometimes a grumpy dog chased him halfway down the lane. Yet he rarely complained. He felt proud to serve the village, even when his bicycle chain squeaked louder than he wished. Despite the challenges, the boy found joy in small things. He loved the smell of fresh ink, the quiet rustle of pages, and the soft glow of lanterns still burning in a few early homes. He enjoyed being the first to see the headlines, as if the world whispered its secrets to him before telling anyone else. I remember watching him from my bedroom window. I admired how quickly he pedaled, how gracefully he tossed the papers, and how he smiled when dawn finally painted the roofs gold. One morning, he noticed me watching and handed me a copy for free. "News for the early bird," he said. It felt like receiving a treasure meant only for me. Without the newspaper boy, many villagers would have begun their day in silence, unaware of weather changes, market prices, or distant events. His route carried information that shaped decisions, conversations, and hopes. He didn't think of himself as important, but the village leaned on him more than he ever realized. Knowledge arrived on his small bicycle. Every morning his bicycle created a gentle pattern across the village. The turning wheels, the landing papers, the soft footsteps as he repositioned a fallen copy, all of it formed a quiet rhythm that wove itself into our mornings. By the time the sun rose, his route was complete, and the village slowly came alive around the stories he delivered. So, my child, that was the newspaper boy, the swift messenger of dawn. His work began in darkness, but brought light in the form of stories and news. As we leave him to finish his final turn through the lanes, imagine the soft flutter of pages settling on porches. At the next part of our walk, we will meet another worker whose hands shaped the early hours in a different way. Now, my child, let us step into a time before electric lights brightened every corner. In this village, there was a man who carried both darkness and light in the palm of his hand. He was the Lamplighter. Each evening he walked the streets with a long rod and a small flame, touching every gas lamp until the village glowed like a pocketful of stars. Without him, nights would have felt far colder and lonelier. Before dawn, the Lamplighter returned to the streets he had brightened the night before. His boots made slow, steady steps as he approached each lamp. With a practiced twist of his rod, he gently turned off the gas flame. A soft hiss marked the end of the night. He moved from lamp to lamp, never rushing, as if he were guiding the village from dreams back into morning. He carried a metal-tipped pole for lighting and extinguishing, and a small pouch with matches and spare mantles. The pole extended like a gentle arm, reaching high lamps with ease. When a lamp flickered weakly, he climbed a short ladder to adjust the flame. The smell of gas, faint but distinct, drifted through the air wherever he worked, reminding the village that light was a fragile, hand-tended gift. People greeted him warmly, for he brought comfort to their nights. Lovers met beneath lamps he had lit. Shopkeepers closed their doors under his soft glow. Children watched him with awe, believing he carried magic, and in a way, he did. His simple act of raising a flame made the darkness kinder, turning empty streets into welcoming paths. Rain made his job difficult, for the wind tried to snuff out his flame. Snow buried his path and froze the lamp valves. Yet he walked on, shielding the tiny fire with his coat, when the gusts grew fierce. People later said that the warmest sight on a winter night was his lantern flickering bravely through the storm, a promise that light would always return. I remember watching him from my window as a child. On winter evenings, I waited for the moment he touched the lamp outside our home. With a small spark, the street transformed, shadows softened, and the world felt safe again. That brief flash of light was my favorite moment of the day. It meant the night had arrived, not with fear, but with gentleness. Each lamp carried meaning. One marked the start of the market road, another signaled the way to the river path. When the lamps lit up, the entire village map seemed to awaken. Travelers relied on them to find their way, and neighbors used them as quiet meeting points. The lamplighter's path stitched the community together like a glowing thread. Before electricity, darkness was not just an absence of light, it was a real danger. Thieves hid in shadows, travelers risked slipping on uneven stones, and wild animals sometimes wandered close. But the lamplighter's flame pushed back the fear. His lamps made the village feel watchful, almost alive, protecting those who walked beneath their warm circles of light. When electric lamps finally arrived, his work slowly faded. At first, he simply assisted the workers installing new lights, but soon, there were fewer lamps to tend. One evening, he lit the final gas lamp on the main street, paused as the flame steadied, and whispered a soft goodbye. The village shone brighter than ever, but something gentle was lost. So, my child, that was the lamplighter, the man who carried the night on his shoulders and set stars upon our streets. As we leave him now, imagine the glow, fading softly as dawn stretches across the rooftops. His footsteps grow distant, but the warmth he brought remains. At the next moment of our walk, we will meet another worker whose strength shaped the early hours in a very different way. Now, my child, let us move toward the sound of clattering tools and heavy footsteps. Here comes the ice delivery man, strong and steady, guiding a cart filled with great blocks of winter. Long before refrigerators cooled our food, he brought the cold itself to each doorstep. His work began early, for the morning sun threatened to melt his precious cargo before he reached every home. Each block of ice weighed more than a small child, yet he lifted them with practiced grace. He wrapped his hands in thick cloth to protect them from frostbite and used metal tongs to grip the slippery edges. When he carried the blocks into warm kitchens, steam rose gently like ghostly breath. The strength needed for this job was immense, but he treated each delivery with patient care. The ice he delivered came from a large ice house near the river. In winter, men harvested frozen sheets from the water and stored them under layers of sawdust. By summer, those blocks were priceless. Each morning, the ice delivery. Man opened the creaking doors of the ice house and breathed in the sharp chill before stacking his cart for the long route ahead. When he reached a customer's home, he tapped politely and waited. Then he brought the ice inside, placing it gently into the wooden icebox that served as the family's refrigerator. Sometimes the children of the house watched in awe as he chipped off a tiny shard for them to taste. In hot months, that little piece of ice felt like a treasure from a faraway winter. Summer was both his busiest and most difficult season. The sun struck hard, melting the blocks faster than he could deliver them. Water dripped from his cart in a steady trail, marking his path through the village. He often hurried, not for his own sake, but to ensure families had enough cold to keep their food from spoiling. The race against heat was a daily battle he faced bravely. On his belt hung an ice pick, a small hammer, and metal tongs polished from years of use. The pick created clean cuts, the hammer broke stubborn chunks, and the tongs lifted the pieces with surprising precision. Though his tools seemed simple, they demanded skill. One wrong move could send a block crashing to the floor, melting into nothing but disappointment. The villagers respected him greatly. His work kept milk cold, meat fresh, and drinks cool on warm evenings. Whenever he arrived, families greeted him with smiles, and sometimes a cool drink in return. He was more than a delivery man. He was the keeper of comfort in a time when even a small bit of cold felt like a luxury. I remember the day he let me touch a block of ice for the first time. My fingers tingled from the cold, and I felt as if I were holding a piece of winter itself. He laughed warmly and told me to keep a small shard. I carried it home like a precious jewel, watching as it slowly melted into a single drop on my palm. That moment stayed with me for years. When electric refrigerators arrived, his work slowly faded. Fewer households needed blocks of ice, and ice houses began to close. The cart grew lighter each year, until one summer he delivered his final block. The village had moved on, yet many still remembered the man who brought winter to their doors with steady hands and unwavering dedication. So, my child, that was the ice delivery man, strong as the river in winter, gentle as melting snow. As we leave him to guide his cart down the warm morning road, imagine the cool mist rising from the ice at his feet. Soon, we will meet another worker whose voice filled the early hours with news and warnings, shaping the day in a different way. Now, my child, let us wander toward the village square, where a tall man in a bright coat stands beneath the fading lantern light. This is the town crier, the voice of the village. Long before radios or newspapers reached every home, he carried the day's news on his tongue. With a bell in one hand and a rolled parchment in the other, he gathered the attention of all who passed. Each morning, just after the first hint of sunlight touched the rooftops, he stepped into the square and rang his bell. Hear thee, he called, his voice strong enough to reach even the sleepiest corners of the village. Children paused their games, shopkeepers lifted their heads, and farmers listened from their wagons. His words marked the official beginning of the day. The town crier announced everything: new laws, market prices, visiting merchants, approaching storms, and even lost animals. Some days the news was joyful, other days it carried worry, but he spoke with clarity and respect, knowing that every household relied on his voice. In those moments, he was more than a messenger. He was the thread that connected the people to the world beyond their village. Villagers trusted him completely. They believed his voice more than rumors, for he never exaggerated nor hid the truth. When he finished reading the day's announcements, he often stayed to answer questions or explain complicated matters. He was a bridge between ordinary families and distant decisions made by leaders they would never meet. His bell carried its own kind of magic. A single ring meant important news. 3 rings signaled danger or urgent updates. And when he rang it softly in the evening, shopkeepers knew it was time to close for the night. The entire rhythm of the village followed the sound of that small brass bell, polished by years of faithful service. I remember standing beside my father, listening to the town crier's announcements echo across the square. His voice bounced off the brick walls and drifted through alleyways like a gentle command. Once, when I lost my wooden toy horse, he announced it to the crowd. By evening, someone had returned it. That day, I learned how a strong voice could bring a community together. His work was not easy. Rain soaked his parchment, wind tried to steal his hat, and winter froze his breath before he spoke. Yet he continued, day after day, believing that information was as important as food or fire. Whether the news was heavy or light, he delivered it with steady confidence, ensuring every villager understood what the day might bring. Without the town crier, the village would have stumbled through confusion. Merchants would arrive unnoticed, storms would catch farmers unprepared, and no one would know when celebrations or gatherings were planned. His announcements held the village together like invisible stitching, quietly strengthening the bond among neighbors who depended on shared understanding. When printed newspapers and telegraphs spread, the town crier's role slowly faded. Fewer people gathered in the square, and his bell rang less often. One morning, he stepped onto the platform, delivered his final announcement, and bowed deeply as the villagers applauded. Though his voice eventually fell silent, the memory of his presence echoed for generations. So, my child, that was the town crier, the man whose voice carried the heartbeat of the village. As we move on from the square, Imagine his bell ringing softly behind us, guiding the day one final time. Ahead, another worker waits, shaping the morning with footsteps far quieter, but just as important. Let us continue our walk toward his story. Now, my child, let us wander into the quieter corners of the village, where shadows stretch long across the stones. Here walks the watchman, the silent guardian of the night. While others sleep peacefully in warm beds, he moves slowly through dim alleys, with a lantern in hand. His presence kept the village safe, not through force, but through steady vigilance that never wavered. Each evening, once the lamps were lit and the village settled into calm, the watchman began his rounds. He checked every door, every shutter, and every shop front, pushing gently to ensure they were locked tight. His lantern cast a warm circle on the ground, guiding him through familiar paths. The quiet creak of his boots became a lullaby for those drifting to sleep. What made him exceptional was not strength, but attention. He listened carefully to the wind brushing rooftops, to distant dogs barking, to any unfamiliar sound that might signal trouble. In a world before telephones or quick help, the watchman was the first line of protection. His ears, more than his lantern, were the tools that kept the village safe. Sometimes he met late workers returning home, carrying bread or tools from long shifts. He greeted them with a quiet nod and often walked a portion of the road beside them. When he found a drunk man asleep by a wall, he gently guided him home. Two frightened children who woke from bad dreams, the glow of his lantern through the window meant comfort and safety. His job was hardest in storms. Rain soaked his coat until it clung to his skin, and wind threatened to snuff out his lantern. But he pressed forward, shielding the flame with his hand. Snow piled high around his boots, slowing his steps, yet he never stopped. The villagers slept soundly through every season because he endured what the night delivered. He carried only simple items, a lantern, a wooden staff, and a ring of keys for shops entrusted to him. Unlike soldiers or police, he bore no weapon. Instead, he relied on presence, patience, and a calm voice that softened conflicts before they grew. His lantern's glow was enough to deter mischief and guide those who needed help. I remember watching him from my bedroom window when storms frightened me. Even through heavy rain, I could see the lantern bobbing gently as he walked. That small light felt like a promise that someone was awake, watching over us. Once, when our gate blew open in the wind, he closed it quietly and tucked a stone against it. My mother found it in the morning and smiled knowingly. The villagers respected him in a quiet, unspoken way. He received few thanks, for most never saw the dangers he prevented, but they trusted him deeply. They slept soundly because of his path through the darkness. Even merchants leaving early for the market greeted him, knowing his watchful eyes kept their shops safe through the long night. When modern police forces and electric streetlights appeared, the watchman's rounds slowly faded. Brighter nights required fewer lanterns, and new systems replaced old routines. One evening he walked his final route, touching the familiar doors he had guarded for decades. He whispered a soft farewell to the empty streets, and though most never knew, the village lost a silent hero that night. So, my child, that was the watchman, the quiet protector who carried the night with steadiness and care. As we leave his shadowed paths behind, imagine the lantern's glow fading gently, like a warm heartbeat in the dark. Ahead waits another worker, one who shaped the mornings with broom and patience. Let us continue our walk to his story. Now, my child, let us walk toward the market road, where the first soft light of morning begins to stretch across the stones. Here works the street sweeper, the man who welcomed every sunrise with a broom in his hands. While others still rubbed sleep from their eyes, he swept away the dust, leaves, and remnants of yesterday. His quiet labor prepared the village for the day to come. The street sweeper began before dawn, when the world was still hushed. He moved slowly, guiding his long broom in smooth arcs across the cobblestones. Each sweep made a gentle she sound, as if brushing the night away. His pace never changed, steady, patient, unhurried. In that soft rhythm, he carried the dignity of a man who understood the value of simple work. His broom was handmade from bundled twigs tied tightly to a wooden handle. With it, he knew how to clear every corner between steps, under market stalls, along gutter lines where leaves gathered. He sometimes carried a small shovel to lift piles into his cart. Though his tools were humble, his movements were skilled. He could transform a dirty street into a welcoming path with quiet pride. As he swept, the village slowly woke around him. The baker opened his shutters. A rooster crowed in the distance. A shop door creaked. Yet the street sweeper's sound remained the first true sign of morning. People often said that if they didn't hear his broom, the day felt strangely incomplete, as if something essential had been forgotten. His job was simple in appearance, but far from easy. Rain turned dust into thick mud that clung to the ground. Autumn brought storms of fallen leaves that buried the paths, and festivals left behind litter from crowds celebrating late into the night. Yet he continued each morning with the same steady determination, believing that a clean street brought order to a weary world. Most villagers greeted him with warm smiles. Children loved to walk behind him, leaving small footprints on the freshly swept stones. Shopkeepers often offered him a cup of warm tea, grateful for the clean space outside their doors. Though he rarely spoke much, his presence was comforting, like the quiet promise that the day was starting right. When I was young, I used to follow the street sweeper on my way to school. He would pause, tap my shoulder, and brush a clear path for me with his broom. It made me feel important, as if the whole village opened the morning just for me. Even now, whenever I hear a broom sweep across stone, a part of that childhood warmth returns. To many people, the street sweeper represented more than cleanliness. He symbolized renewal. No matter how messy yesterday had been, muddy shoes, spilled grain, torn papers, he wiped the slate clean each dawn. His work reminded the village that every day could begin again, free of the burdens left behind. As machines and paved roads arrived, hand sweeping became rare. Large bristled carts replaced brooms, and the gentle she of sweeping slowly faded from the morning air. The street sweeper completed his final route one spring morning and placed his broom against the market wall. People still talk about how empty the streets sounded after he left. So, my child, that was the street sweeper, the man who greeted each day with patience and care. As we move past the market square, imagine the clean stones beneath our feet, polished by his early work. Ahead lies another story, waiting in the soft morning breeze. Let us continue our walk to the next worker who shaped the rhythm of village life. Now, my child, let us follow the path toward the old village well. Here works the water carrier, the woman who brought life to every doorstep. Before pipes and faucets flowed through homes, families depended on her strong arms and steady steps. Each morning she lowered a wooden bucket into the cold, dark well, pulling up the day's first water with quiet strength and steady breath. Water looks light, but it is heavier than you think. Each bucket strained her shoulders as she lifted them and hung them carefully from the yoke across her back. Balanced but burdened, she walked slowly along the uneven stones. With every step the water swayed gently, catching the early light like tiny ripples of silver. Her path required patience, rhythm, and unwavering balance. Her route wound through narrow alleys, past bakeries, workshops, and small cottages. She knew exactly which families needed extra water for washing, which homes had newborns, and which elderly neighbors couldn't reach the well themselves. At each stop, she poured water into clay jars or wooden basins, leaving behind freshness that would carry a household through the day. What I remember most, my child, is the soothing sound of her buckets, the soft slosh as she walked, the clear splash as she poured, the gentle drip that followed her down the steps. In a world without humming machines or running taps, these sounds were music of the morning, simple, pure, and calming. They told the village that water, the heart of life, had arrived. Her work never paused for weather. In winter, icy winds stiffened her fingers, and water threatened to freeze before she reached a home. In summer, the heavy heat stole her strength, and every step felt longer than the last. Rain made the stones slick, snow hid the path, yet she walked on because without her, washing, cooking, and drinking would all come to a halt. Many villagers admired her gentle heart. She often carried extra water for widows, refusing payment when they tried to offer coins. She checked in on sick families and brought cool water to overheated workers. Though her days were exhausting, she found purpose in caring for others. Her kindness flowed as steadily as the water she delivered. I recall holding out a small wooden cup when I was young. She dipped it into her bucket and handed it to me with a warm smile. The water tasted fresh, colder than anything I had ever known, as if it came straight from the heart of the earth. She laughed softly when I shivered. That moment taught me that even the simplest things can become precious when given with care. Without her, the village could not function. Bakers needed water for dough, blacksmiths for quenching iron, mothers for bathing their children. Wells were few and often far apart. She turned those distant sources into comfort that reached every home. Her footsteps stitched the community together, one bucket at a time. When modern plumbing arrived, her role slowly faded. Pipes carried water directly into kitchens, and the well grew quiet. One day she walked her route with empty buckets, knowing it would be her last. Villagers gathered to thank her for years of service. Though her burden finally lifted, many missed the familiar rhythm of her footsteps on the morning road. So, my child, that was the water carrier, the gentle bearer of life, who carried the village's needs across her shoulders. As we step away from the old well, imagine the sound of water fading behind us, replaced by a new morning breeze. Ahead waits another worker whose path was less gentle, yet just as essential. Let us continue our walk toward his story. Now, my child, let us step into the quiet hours of the night, those moments when most villagers slept deeply, unaware of the hard work taking place beneath their feet. Here worked the Gong Farmer, a man whose task was humble, yet vital. He cleaned the waste pits and privies, carrying away what the village left behind. His labor was unseen, but without it, sickness and foul air would have ruled the streets. The Gong Farmer began his work when lanterns dimmed and homes grew silent. With a sturdy shovel and thick gloves, he entered dark cellars and small wooden structures behind houses. He moved carefully, guided only by a single candle or moonlight. His work was unpleasant, yet he carried it out with quiet dignity, knowing the village's health depended on him. He wore heavy boots, thick cloth around his nose, and carried ropes, buckets, and lime powder. The buckets he filled were sealed tightly to prevent contamination as he transported them away. Though his tools were simple, they required skill. Each step had to be measured, each lift steady. Mistakes were dangerous, not only for him but for the entire community relying on cleanliness. He rarely spoke during his rounds. The night was too quiet, and his job demanded focus. The only sounds were the scrape of his shovel and the soft clink of his tools. While others dreamed peacefully, he shouldered the burden of keeping illness at bay. His silence was not loneliness, it was purpose, carried with a calm sense of responsibility. Though some were shy around him because of his work, many quietly respected him. Mothers taught their children to be grateful for the people who did difficult tasks. Bakers left warm bread on his route, and farmers offered fresh vegetables in thanks. The village understood that without him, life would become dangerous quickly. Clean streets and healthy homes were his invisible gift. I remember seeing him once as a boy. He walked past our gate at dawn, carrying his heavy buckets with slow determination. My father tipped his hat to him, and the man nodded with tired eyes. That simple exchange taught me that every job, no matter how unglamorous, deserves respect. It was the first time I understood that dignity comes from responsibility, not from praise. The Gong Farmer carried more than physical burden. His work was often hidden, unspoken, and lonely, yet he continued year after year, believing that someone must protect the village from what others preferred not to see. His perseverance shaped the health and safety of generations who never learned his name but lived safely because of his service. His job was dangerous. Pits could collapse, fumes could overwhelm, and diseases were always a threat. Still, he moved slowly, methodically, checking each step before taking the next. He was not reckless, but brave, in a quiet, steady way. In every century, heroes appear in unexpected forms, and he was one of them. As sanitation systems improved and indoor plumbing spread through towns, the Gong Farmer's role faded. Cleaning pits became a machine's task, rather than a man's burden. He retired without ceremony, but many villagers still remembered his long nights of unseen work. The clean, healthy village that followed owed much to those who labored in silence. So, my child, that was the Gong Farmer, the quiet guardian who protected the village, not with strength or fame, but with courage and endurance. As we step away from the shadowed outskirts of the night, imagine the slow sunrise stretching across the homes he kept safe. Ahead lies another story, waiting to unfold in the growing light of morning. My child, now that we have walked through the stories of these 10 early workers, take a quiet moment with me. Think of the footsteps, the lanterns, the morning air that wrapped around their simple routines. These were people who began the day long before most opened their eyes. Their hands shaped the rhythm of life, and though they are gone now, their presence still lingers in the quiet corners of memory. When I close my eyes, I can still see that old village, the narrow lanes, the warm lamps, the soft glow of dawn. Each worker moved with purpose, not for glory or reward, but because the community depended on them. They rarely spoke of pride, yet everything they did carried a gentle dignity. In their humble tasks, the village found its strength. Sometimes, when the world feels too fast, I remember these people and the simple grace of their days. A tap on a window at dawn, the clink of milk bottles, a newspaper landing softly on a doorstep, a lantern flickering in the mist. These sounds were the heartbeats of a life that moved slowly, steadily, and always with care. They remind me that even the smallest actions can hold deep meaning. Though the tools have changed and the village has grown brighter, their lessons remain. Work done with sincerity endures. Kindness, even in hardship, leaves warm footprints. And the hands that serve quietly often shape the world more deeply than those who make noise. My child, may you remember these stories whenever life feels rushed, and find calm in the rhythm of steady effort. So, my child, our walk through the old morning hours ends here. The workers we met may no longer stride through these streets, but their spirit still warms the paths of memory. If you listen closely, you might still hear the brooms whisper, the lanterns glow, or the soft tap of a long wooden pole. Rest now, and let these quiet stories stay with you. When you are ready, we will begin another journey together.